taking our jobs news, because it does seem to be happening, right? And is it a concern for the economy? Because yesterday, Veronica Clark on Surveillance said she thinks the Fed could cut rates 3 times this year because the jobs numbers will look so bad this summer.
We don't agree with that. The key driver of jobs is investment. And obviously, you have tremendous investment coming from the hyperscalers. There's going to be a lot of job churn. You know, if you mention AI at a graduation, you get booed. So it is making it harder. My son does not have a job coming out of Penn. And that's because these huge companies are laying off people. But that's not the overall job market. I mean, we all obsess about it because it's our kids or friends. But the big job market is all those jobs building these hyper scaling situations, building power plants, building chip plants. So that's really the key driver.
He's an electrical engineering graduate. He should be doing just that.
Yes, he'll be fine. But it is creating a churn and dislocation, and that's why you should not mention AI in your graduation speech.
Well, I mean, I've made this argument to Matt before, this idea that, yes, it creates jobs because you need to build these data centers, but they're temporary jobs. Once they're built, you need essentially, on average, I think it's about 50 people running the place. It's just, you know, some HVAC men and women. And if you put the same amount of money in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, you'd be creating 1,500 jobs per data center. So it feels like maybe here and the now we're okay, but long term, is this a very different labor market we're going to need to contend with?
Well, there's going to be tremendous reallocation among job categories. But if you look historically, the only thing that's caused unemployment is a severe contraction in investment. So as long as the investment boom continues, there will be growth in jobs, and the market will clear. So obviously, software engineers are going to be less needed, maybe hardware engineers more needed, other job categories. So there's going to have to be retraining. We have a very dynamic job market in the U.S. Thank God we're not in Europe. And so people will adjust, and the market will clear.
By the way, this idea that we're going to keep spending and going to keep building out, I understand the thesis. It makes complete sense considering that we are so far under the capacity for compute, for energy, you name it, that we need. But don't these hyperscalers and all the big companies have every incentive to find efficiencies? Is this not how this ultimately ends, that the scarcity economics gets flipped because we figure out some way to bend time and space?
Well, I think the productivity is spectacular for investment. And if you really just look at Silicon Valley, you get big layoffs from the big companies, and guess what? It creates startups. So there's always new jobs, market's dynamic. If technology created employment, then we would have mass unemployment because of the steam engine being developed. So those are all irrational fears, but it is not great for graduates right now, and you do have to monitor the job market and be dynamic.
By the way, your calls have been so spot on over the last few years when there have been a lot of fears, rational or irrational, right? A lot of them, you know, politically influenced. If you have TDS, right, you wouldn't have thought that this market is going to climb so far so fast. How do you do such a sober analysis of these markets when you have things like, you know, ridiculous tariffs or maybe a botched invasion of a Middle Eastern country leading to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? Like, how do you separate that stuff?
Well, you have to look at economic history. So everybody who's on television implies that recessions are created because the consumer stumbles, but that's not the history. Recessions are created from the investment side, and that's why we're bullish on the economy. If you look at first quarter GDP, construction and housing in a pretty significant recession, but the tech businesses booming like it's never happened before, up 15%. That's why even if the strait remains closed, we're projecting 2.5%. But you have to be laser focused on the things that matter: money supply, oil prices, and investment. If you just focus on that, you won't make these bad calls like, oh, the consumer is going to roll over because of student loans. And you'll recognize when we are going to have recession, you know, if the Fed raises rates, we don't have a tech boom, and housing crashes, we're going to have recession. That's 13 out of 14 recessions are created by that dynamic.
All right, Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you in studio. Infrastructure Capital CEO and CIO.